If you would turn and mark in the red hymnals to number 268, Hark the Gentle Voice. This will be our song of invitation following the lessons tonight. Number 268. And before we go down to our classes, we'll turn to number 335, Live for Jesus, number 335. This always seems like a good, appropriate song for midweek services, at least for me, for trying to gather our thoughts in the middle of the week, to urge us to live on the rest of the week doing just that, living for Jesus. So, Live for Jesus, number 335. We'll sing all three verses. Mm-hmm. Live for Jesus, oh my brother, his disciple ever be. Render not to any other what alone our Lord should be. Live for Jesus, live for Jesus, give him all thou hast to give. On the cross the world's Redeemer gave his life that thou mightst live. Live for Jesus, wandering sinner, under Satan serve no more. Of the promised prize a winner, thou mayst be when life is o'er. Live for Jesus, live for Jesus, give him all thou hast to give. On the cross the world's Redeemer gave his life that thou mightst live. Live for Jesus in life's morning, at the noontide hour he is, and at even the day is turning, and in every endless bliss. Live for Jesus, live for Jesus, give him all thou hast to give. On the cross the world's Redeemer gave his life that thou mightst live.
Okay, Bible fans and scholars alike, we are in Deuteronomy chapter 18 this evening. Everybody doing okay? Great. Well, I kind of forgot to put on my slide what the theme for the chapter is, but you see it right above that. This is about providing for the priests and the coming prophet of Israel. And we'll get into that in just a bit. Let's look at the first 8 verses and start by reading those together. Who would like to read the first 8 verses for me?
The Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi, will have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They will eat the Lord's offering, food offering,
Okay, so what's the Levites' inheritance? They get no physical inheritance at all in the land. So what is their inheritance according to this passage? The Lord. And what does that mean? That's kind of cool, actually. The Lord is their inheritance. But what does that mean, Sandra?
Their service to the Lord is their inheritance.
Well, what are they getting from that? God's getting their service. The people are getting their service. Absolutely true. What tribe did Moses come from? He was a Levite. How do we know that? Well, yeah, it tells us who was his brother and who was Aaron, first high priest. So by default, Moses and Aaron came from the tribe of Levi. So this concept of the Lord is their inheritance. As Daron said, that's a very special designation. It sets them apart from everybody else in the nation. And given the fact that they don't have any land, they're not going to have any crops, they're not going to have any vineyards, they're not going to have any olive oil, they're not going to have any sheep, any beef, goats. So how are they supposed to eat? They're still going to eat pretty well. They're going to get the stomachs of all of the sacrifices. Did you catch that? Apparently that's some sort of delicacy, but they were going to get the shoulder down in verse 3, right? They shall give the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the stomach. I'd love to taste ox cheeks just once, maybe, see what it's like. But they're going to get all of that in terms of meat. What else are they going to get? The first fruits of grain, wine, and oil. Okay? And yeah. Yeah, it might be pretty good with some collard greens. Okay, so all right. So what else did they get other than the food stuff? Sandra. They got not only wool, but the first shearing of the wool. Why is that significant? That would be the best of the year, wouldn't it? That'd be the best. Years ago, when we were in North Carolina, we actually went to an alpaca farm and helped the owners shear their alpacas. And there's certain kinds of wool on an animal. There's back wool, which is coarser. There's belly wool, which is a lot finer. And the first wool of the season is always the best. And if you're lucky, you can shear an animal like that twice and get a second shearing, but the first wool is always the best of the year. So what does that remind you of? The first of everything needed to go to God. The firstborn of all the flocks were supposed to be free will offerings and sacrifice, different kinds of sacrifices. So this kind of reinforced the fact that the Levites needed to have faith that they were going to be taken care of. They're going to be dependent on God's people for their sustenance. And other than the military and political power, which they really didn't have anything to do with, their lot was the spiritual responsibility of the people. Now, How did the Levites do once they got settled in the land, leading the people spiritually? Somebody's shaking their head. Apparently not so good. Whose primary responsibility was it to help the people remember and obey all the covenant commandments that we've been talking about all the way through these chapters? It was the Levites. It was their solemn duty to teach the people the law, to remind the people of the law, and to make sure the people were keeping the law. So what was their primary failure once they got settled in the land, the people? What's the most important thing they were supposed to do once they drove out the people? Well, the king was. What else, Sandra?
One of the most important things was to see that the people worship God as he had ordained, as he told them, and to keep idols away.
Exactly. Keep the idols away. So they were supposed to tear down every Asherah tree, every idol, every shrine on every hillside throughout the whole land that they inherited. That was the most important thing they were supposed to do immediately. And they just didn't do it. And I will say that it was the people's fault, but even more so it was the Levites' fault. They were all over the land, throughout all of the other 11 tribes, everywhere. They knew there was Asherah trees in people's backyards, and they knew there was pagan altars up on this hillside and on that mountain over there. They knew that, and they did not make sure the people destroyed every bit of that, and that was the beginning of their downfall.
Were they supposed to obliterate everybody that they conquered?
Yes, completely destroy and or drive out everybody in the land, and they didn't even do that.
So they didn't do that, then they intermarry, then you start listening to your wife, and you start worshiping who she wants to worship, and there you are.
Are you saying listening to your wife is?
No, I'm saying that this is,
Yeah, dig a little harder.
you're not supposed to take a wife, a foreign wife anyway.
Exactly.
If she'd been there, you'd take her.
Exactly.
Those are the exact things that God warned against. Those are the exact reasons the command to do what you've already alluded to was given. And obviously we see that it's exactly what God said would happen unfolded.
Exactly. He warned and warned and warned and warned the people. Don't do these things, do these things, because, and they didn't do it. And it turned out exactly the way God warned them it would if they didn't obey his will.
So when we study the Old Testament and we think God was harsh, we need to remember God's wisdom first.
Absolutely. Good point.
In all aspects.
Yeah. And it's like when you're a kid. You don't always understand your parents' reasoning for things either. But if we trust our parents to raise us, because we've never been an adult before, we can avoid a lot of the nonsense that me and some of the others of you went through, being too smart for our own britches. But that's what these people were. They just didn't listen. And what does listen mean in the context of Deuteronomy? Obey. Okay, great. That's the first 8 verses. Let's look at verses 9 through 14. And by the way, Kelly and I will be here Sunday morning, but we'll be gone next week, and Terry will be your illustrious teacher next Wednesday night. And if you like him, you can keep him once we get back. It's fine with me. All right, let's look at 9 through 14. Who wants to read that?
When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not burn or follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who intercepts omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations
Okay. So there's several categories of evil that God is concerned about here. I didn't take the time to define every single one of these, so let's kind of talk about it. What does it mean? Well, we know what it means when people pass through the fire. Their sons or daughters pass through the fire. That was the abomination of the idol Molech, where you literally sacrificed your child and burned them up on an idol. But what's divination? Yes. 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 Having some sort of divine knowledge of some sort, extra normal kind of knowledge that a regular person wouldn't have.
Not necessarily having that, but at least pretending that you have it to the extent that you can fool people into following you and believing.
So you think there were some fakes back in the day?
No, they wouldn't have done that.
Of course not. That was before P.T. Barnum, right? Okay. All right, so that's kind of what divination is. Are there people that are really witches that practice witchcraft? Do they have any power at all? They think they do, someone said. Anybody ever heard of the Witch of Endor?
She was surprised, wasn't she?
She was surprised. What did she do?
She supposedly called people up from the dead.
She was a caller of the dead, and she had a whole private practice of calling people up from the dead, apparently. And she was called on by Saul to call up Samuel so he could get some advice from Samuel. And I think she was as shocked as anybody that he actually came. But there were people that made their living calling up the dead, like modern day seances and Ouija boards, and let's sit here in this dark room and talk to Grandma or Aunt Susie and see what they're up to these days. There's people that did that, 3,500 years ago. What about people that interpret omens? Were there people that could do that? Yes?
There are people who say they can do that. And they might be reading tea leaves or coffee grounds or something and giving someone what they think they need. But I seriously doubt that there's any truth.
So I hear these commercials on the radio all the time about California psychics. And, if you're not pleased with your first reading, then you get your money back. And so I don't know how you could know if you're pleased or not, because they're just going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear. And everybody knows, at least most people know, it's a scam, but there are enough people that want to believe it that they will pay some money and get a reading of some sort. But that sort of stuff was happening back in the day.
Well, advertising is expensive, so there's several people that must be joined in.
It must be. I hear those ads all the time.
They say it'll change your life or your money back, so.
Change your, well, can you just try it out and report back to us when I get back from my,
I think that's how it changes your life. Once you get started, you just keep doing it.
right,
Your life will change.
right. You have no money.
Yeah.
You make all these stupid decisions.
If we could call her up, we could ask Nancy Reagan, because she had her own White House
She did.
person.
She did. Okay. People who cast spells. Sounds kind of witchy to me, but I don't know if there's a difference between a witch and someone who casts spells, but are these spells valid, do you think? Did anyone have the power to do any of these things back then?
Power comes sometimes because people believe in them. And that changes their life. But the actual fact
Yeah, it didn't say that Pharaoh's magicians faked turning a rod into a snake. It said they turned their rods into a snake. Maybe they literally did. Ronnie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just know, how do we know this stuff was true or not true? Maybe they could call up spirits back then. I have no reason to believe they couldn't. It was just wrong.
Yes, and that was the point I was going to make. I don't think we need to be too quick to dismiss all of this as just fake stuff. I think it's entirely possible that some people had the ability through Satan or evil spirits to do some of these things. I don't think this many people out of all these nations doing it all the time would be able to keep doing it if they didn't have some results of some sort. So I just don't think we need to be super quick to dismiss all of it as just hooey. Yes, Terry.
Well, we have recordings of them on phone. We don't see it today, but back then.
Could you speak a little louder?
Oh, yeah. They had people that were possessed.
Yes, in the New Testament, absolutely.
Now, I would say that in some of the things that people had the power, like in the Old Testament, I think that some of the scriptures enlightens the fact that God allowed that. There was a purpose for them to have that power. Just like people can speak in tongues or whatever. And I think there were some instances where the benefit of someone being able to do what we think is impossible, but with God's will, it can be done. But those days are gone. You're not going to see any of that today. There was reasons for a lot of things that happened in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And also during the apostleship and everything, to heal people and all that. So not everything could be said that it was from Satan. Now the thing about it is, what's really fascinating is the time when there was those that thought that they can dismiss evil spirits. But there's a recording of in the Bible where those that were possessed by those spirits or demons, they mocked those guys because they were fake, and they knew it. And that was fascinating on the basis of what they did to those that were fake, thinking that they had the authority, because they said, "Who are you?"
Right.
Demons said.
Exactly. Mark, did you have a comment?
I was thinking about, I understand what Terry's saying, but we have a report too where Jesus took this spirit out of a person, sent it into the swine or pig. So I don't know what spirit that was or what demon that was or whatever it may be. But I'm not convinced at that particular time it was fake.
Well, I'm not either. And, you know, Jesus, when the apostles couldn't cast out a certain demon, Jesus said, this kind only comes out with fasting and prayer. Well, if he was the only one that could cast out demons, how would he know that this kind takes something special? So I think there were demons that other people were able to cast out through certain powers. And remember, these people, the inhabitants of Canaan, were not going to be driven out and destroyed just because of idolatry. It was also because of all of this. And I don't think a few dozen fake people, you know, hanging up a witchcraft shingle here and there is enough for God to say these people are so evil they need to be destroyed. So my personal belief is that there was actual ability to do some of this stuff. And because it was actually possible and people were doing it, it was despicable and detestable to God and part of the evil. I think they figured out how to do some of this stuff in the realm of the dead or other powers or through Satan or whatever. I don't know, just my opinion, but kind of makes sense to me, but that's what I want to throw out for consideration. Any other comments on, yes, on this section of verses?
Luke 8, talking about Mary Magdalene. It just introduced her as a certain woman who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, called Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
evil spirits and infirmities.
So 7 evil spirits came out of Mary Magdalene. We know the whole time Jesus' ministry was going on, there were evil spirits as a part of this whole scenario. We never really hear an awful lot about people being possessed by evil spirits in the Old Testament. But I think this whole concept of all of these categories we're talking about really show that these people were really into it as a part of their worship to false gods. Okay. And the Israelites were told to be blameless in all of this, to be holy and distinct from these nations, and not to gain insight through supernatural means, even if it's fake. Don't even look into it. Mark, you had a comment? Oh, you were just bidding on the current item?
Thinking about Simon the sorcerer, but I don't know if that's different.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and we could spend a lot of time digging into this. But let's move on to the next few verses. We got to get through this chapter, and so let's look at 15 through 19. Who wants to read that for me?
The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you. From your country you shall listen to him. This is according to all that you ask of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God. Let me not see this great power any more, or I will die. The Lord said to me, They have spoken well. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him.
One more verse.
It shall come about that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him.
Thank you, Layden. All right, let's go back to verse 15. Moses says, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time that Moses refers to himself as a prophet. But what does it mean that it's a prophet like me? What did he mean by that?
Big things that they happen, he must be a prophet.
Okay. Do you recall any prophecies that Moses made?
Talking about being a mediator?
No, I'm talking about being a prophet right now.
Oh, I mean, does Moses talk about being a mediator?
Well, I think that's definitely a part of it. What else do you think he means when he's talking about a prophet like me? Oops, sorry.
He got the water out of the rock. That must have been I would call that prophecy. He told that the rock to give water, and it did so. It happened.
Okay. Is that a prophecy? Could be. Sandra?
Prophet can also be a teacher.
Yes.
And Christ was a teacher, and Moses was also. Both were lawgivers as well.
Okay. So a prophet doesn't mean just giving prophecies about the future that things will come true. It's also teaching and giving divine instruction. Okay? What are the qualifications of this prophet like me, according to Moses?
I'll give instructions.
They're going to have to listen to him because
It's coming from God.
God's going to put words in his mouth to speak to you. And why is he going to do this?
Because they don't want to hear God.
They didn't want to hear God speak at all. Let's go back to Mount Sinai when they were terrified when God himself spoke the 10 Commandments, the foundation of the law, the Shema, and the mountain was quaking and it was on fire, and God's booming voice, thou shalt not. That must have been terrifying. They say, we don't want to hear his voice ever again. And God didn't say, well, you wimps. He said, you've spoken well. I think you've got the right perspective, not wanting to hear me speak to you. and therefore I'm going to give you a prophet, and I'm going to put words in his mouth, and he's going to speak to you, and you better obey him. What's the other qualification that Moses is talking about this person?
What he says is going to come to pass must come to pass.
Yes, his words must come true. Great. And there's one more.
Come from within.
It has to be one of your countrymen. Exactly. Ronnie?
Well, it's picked by God. God's picked the person.
Exactly. Exactly true. So all of these things are true. That obviously we're talking about Jesus Christ. In Acts 3:22 and 23, it says, Moses said, the Lord God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. You shall listen to him in whatever he tells you. And it shall be that every soul who does not listen to that prophet shall be destroyed from the people. So this is a direct fulfillment of this passage in Deuteronomy 18. Also, in Hebrews 1, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these days, last days, has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. So both of these are talking about the fulfillment of what Moses is foretelling as a prophet when he says there's going to be a prophet like me rise up from your countrymen, and he's going to speak the words of God because you're too terrified to hear God speak, and you better listen to him. Okay? Any other thoughts and comments on this chunk of verses? But there's more. Obviously, this prophet would speak with God's authority. If God's going to put words in his mouth to speak to the people, then he has the authority to speak from God. And what did Jesus himself claim? He did that. He also said, the words that I speak are the words that my Father gave you. Again, a direct fulfillment of this passage, that God would put the words in his mouth. And that's exactly what Jesus claimed to be doing in 2 or 3 different places.
In John chapter 1, he refers himself
As the Word of God. Absolutely true. Okay? So, Israel requested at Mount Sinai an intermediary, and Moses was that intermediary in that moment. But we're talking about an allegory here. And this is a prophecy about the coming Jesus and being God's intermediary at a future time. And listening to the prophet is a covenant requirement, just like listening to Moses is a covenant requirement. So there's lots of similarities here. And guess we kind of answered that question. But back to Terry's point, Moses was not just any old prophet. He was also a mediator and a lawgiver, Sandra. And he performed miraculous signs. And he spoke to God face to face. There's no other prophet that I know of that has that pedigree. Agreed? I mean, some prophets did some pretty cool things. Elijah, raising dead men's bones, Elisha, but none of them spoke to God face to face. I don't know what was different with the other prophets, but there is no other prophet where it says he spoke face to face with God. And obviously, a lot of prophets had miraculous powers. Sometimes I wish I had the power to call down a bear on somebody that was messing with me, like Elisha. But I'd probably misuse that power a bit, so it's probably good that I don't. But Moses was not just like any other prophet. He was a very special prophet in all of these particular ways. How much time I got, Damon?
5 minutes.
Okay, we're in good shape. All right, the point is, just like Moses was not just any old prophet, Jesus was also not just any old prophet. He was the final prophet. He was a priest after the order of Levi, and he was the king. And he's the only one that was all three of those things. And in addition, he was the perfect mediator. And because he lived in the flesh, he knew what we were going through, what our temptations were. And so he fully understands humanity as he mediates between God and us. Yes, Sandra.
And he was similar to Melchizedek, who was also a prophet, priest, and a king.
That is true. Absolutely true. All right. So here's just a chart put together that kind of talks about some similarities between Moses and Jesus. I'll include this in your eventual handout material once that happens one day, maybe. I'm not being a prophet. I'm telling you I intend to. All right, let's look at the last few verses, verses 20 through 22. Let's read that for me.
But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. Always lose the verse. You may say in your heart, how will we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken, and presumptuously you shall not be afraid of it.
Were there prophets that claimed to be prophets and they really weren't prophets?
All throughout history.
Absolutely, all throughout history, yes, and even through to today. Yeah. I literally worshiped with someone who got so far off track from the scriptures, he literally claimed to be a modern-day apostle. I am now an apostle, an appointed apostle, just like the other 12. Okay? All right, so the test of a true prophet, if you speak in the name of Jehovah, Yahweh, and the message comes true, you're a prophet. If you speak in the name of Yahweh and it doesn't come true, you're a false prophet. And speaking on God's behalf falsely is presumptuous, and you're worthy of death because of it. So the people were supposed to pay close attention when someone claimed to speak for God and see if what they said was going to come true or not. You couldn't tell right when the prophecy was made whether that person is a legitimate prophet or not. You had to wait and see if the prophecy was going to come true. And there's lots of examples of that in the Old Testament throughout the period of the kings and the prophets and throughout the end of the Old Testament. All right. Any questions or comments about chapter 18 that you want to make in the last minute or two? How's this study treating you? You learning? Okay.
We say it a lot, but the punishment that was doled out back then, it's a good thing we don't have that today. There wouldn't be any of us around. And so when we talk about God's love and grace and mercy, we don't need to do so flippantly or half-heartedly, because it's the only thing that sustains us, quite frankly. I know we realize that, I know we talk about that a lot, but when you read verses like that, it just drives it home even more.
Absolutely true. Please read chapters 19 and 20 for Sunday morning. We're going to do our very best to get through both of those chapters, and then I'm going to hand off chapter 21 to Terry while we're out of town, and maybe chapter 22. We'll see. All right, thank you guys.
If you want to go ahead and turn your songbook to number 268, Terry's going to lead us in that in just a minute. 268. So, in the high school class, we've been studying about Solomon. I was really impressed with the passion that Solomon had as a young king to ask God for, he wanted a receptive heart to judge his people and discern between good and evil. God was pleased with that, with his request, and gave him a wise and understanding heart. He also blessed him with a whole lot more, probably more wealth than anybody will ever have. God made him the wisest person to ever live, and actually the wisest person that will ever live. That was Solomon. Brad Toy asked me Sunday, he said, what are you going to talk about in your invitation talk? And I told him about Solomon, and so I told him I'd been thinking about a few things, and I was thinking about if you could live any time in the history of the world, when would you pick? So he was sitting there, I could see the wheels turning. When would I want to live? So I first told him, I said, my first choice would be like the Garden of Eden. That would be really cool. Everything's perfect. And Brad said real quick, day 8. I want to be there day 8. So before everything goes haywire, right? Then second, I said, I think, everything I've studied and everything, I think I would want to be in the times of Solomon. Early Solomon, right? The righteous Solomon. Because there was peace. Everyone was well taken care of. There was, people wanted for nothing. It would have been neat to hear him pour out wisdom. Just sit there and hear him talk. That would have been really cool. And then thinking about Solomon's passions, I thought about my own. I've now worked at Corning longer than my dad did before he retired. I'm now working on my 37th year. About 26 years ago, I had been working to try and get into maintenance. That was my passion. I wanted to get into the maintenance department. And it's still my passion today. Maintenance is my passion. Once I finally got into maintenance, Corning sent me up to Corning, New York, and for their annual maintenance conference. At one point of the conference, they took us to the Corning Museum of Glass. If you ever get a chance to go see that, it's really something to see. It tells the whole story of glass and all the innovations that come through glass. In the museum, they had a movie going on at the time that they showed us all. Corning actually made the Hubble telescope lens. So at the time, it was the biggest telescope lens ever made, and they weren't sure if they could even make it. It was so big. But Corning figured out a way to do that, and they did it. So they were showing this movie on all the different steps of them making this lens. And as we're sitting there watching this, there was one guy out in the middle of all these tradespeople and all these scientists and everything, and they were all like bees. And there was one guy out there pointing, he was directing everything. And the guy sitting beside of me was a friend of mine. At the time, he was new into maintenance too. His name was Dave Hegler. he was a fiber guy. He was, his plant's in Wilmington, North Carolina. So Dave pointed at that guy on the movie, and he was like, I want to be that guy that's directing everything, telling everybody what to do and how to do it. And I said the same thing. I was like, yeah, I want to be that guy too. Yeah, me too. Now we are those guys. When emergencies happen or chaos is going on, they don't know what to do, they come to us and like, what do we do, what do we do? And you tell them, and you go right in and smooth everything out. But we're those guys now at our plants. How did I get to that point? It's because I was passionate. I was passionate about maintenance. I spent all my time learning everything I could about anything and how it broke and how can I make it better? Drive to root cause. Come up with ways to keep problems from happening or bad things from occurring or reoccurring. Figure out ways to help equipment run better and longer. I've spent all my time doing that. And I have to agree with Mike Estes. You know, he said in his last sermon, he talked about our experiences and leading us to where we are today. I feel like my experiences and skills and abilities that I've developed God's blessed me, that it's helped me help the church and members of the church. Because you know how to fix things or you know how to make things go. It helps people. As I think about Solomon, the wisest to ever live, I don't want God to be displeased with me. Not be pleasing to God. I want to put Him first in my life. To be pleasing to God, I have to put Him first in my life. Sometimes, if not most times, it's difficult to do, isn't it? It's hard to put God first a lot of times because we get all wrapped up in what we're doing. We get pulled away from God. We're pulled away because of our jobs, our likes, or our hobbies, or our stuff, the stuff that we've accumulated, our material things. We get wrapped up in that stuff. But putting God first will never be a mistake. Let me say that again. Putting Him first will never be a mistake. If we can do this and follow His commands, we'll have a home with Him for all eternity. That's forever. Some people talk about the questions, a few questions, they talk about what's the meaning of life or what's my purpose in life. Let's see what the wisest person to ever live said. So if you can, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and I'm going to start reading verse 1 and we'll go through 18. Ecclesiastes 1:1. The words of the teacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Absolute futility, says the teacher, absolute futility. Everything is futile. What does a person gain for all his efforts and all he labors at under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets. Painting, it hurries back to the place where it rises. Gusting to the south, turning to the north, turning, goes the wind. And the wind turns its cycles. All the streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams flow, where they flow again. All things are wearisome, more than anyone can say. The eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Can one say about anything, look, this is new? It's already existed in the ages before us. There's no remembrance of those who came before and of those who will come after. There will always be no remembrance by those who follow them. I, the teacher, have been the king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. God has given people the miserable task to keep them occupied. I have seen all things that are done under the sun and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, see, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind was thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, madness and folly. I learned that this too is a pursuit of the wind. For with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases. So I have to agree with that, because the more I've learned about maintenance, processes, facilities, and support systems, the more I have to worry about. The more I know, the more I have to worry about. So let's look at Ecclesiastes 12:13. What's it all mean? 12, 13, and 14. When all has been heard, the conclusion is the matter of this: fear God and keep His commands, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. So, how do you get passionate for God? You become a Christian. You start putting your time and your energy into learning about God, about reading. You start reading and studying the Bible. We've got to obey His gospel. And if we have obeyed His gospel and we've fallen away, we've got to return to Him. If you've not become a Christian, you have to hear His word. That's the Bible. You have to believe that Jesus is His Son, God's Son. You have to repent for your wrongs. You have to confess that Jesus is the Lord, and then you have to be baptized. It's not too late for you to adjust your passions for the Lord. So if we can help you in any way, please come forward as we stand and sing.
fellow Christians. I'm sure we can all agree to that. We've had good classes up here. I hope the young ones have downstairs as well. I've had a couple announcements handed to me.